a WikiVidi Documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Brazilian General Election, 2018. General elections were held in Brazil on the 7th of October 2018 to elect the president, vice president and the National Congress. Elections for state governors and vice governors, state legislative assemblies, and federal district legislative chamber were held at the same time. On the 7th of October 2018, Rio de Janeiro congressman Jair Bolsonaro came first in the first round of the election. The runoff will be between him and former São Paulo Mayor Fernando Haddad. Runoff elections will be held on the 28th of October 2018. Background: the 2014 elections saw Workers' Party candidate Dilma Rousseff re-elected as president in the second round with 51.6% of the vote, defeating Aécio Neves of the Brazilian Social Democracy Party, who received 48.4% of the vote. Rousseff had first been elected in the 2010 elections, succeeding her political mentor, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who was in office from 2003 until 2011. However, on the 3rd of December 2015, impeachment proceedings against Rousseff were officially accepted by the Chamber of Deputies. On the 12th of May 2016, the Federal Senate temporarily suspended Rousseff's powers and duties for up to 6 months or until the Senate reached a verdict to remove her from office if found guilty or to acquit her from the crimes charged. Vice President Michel Temer, of the Brazilian Democratic Movement Party, assumed her powers and duties as acting president of Brazil during the suspension. On the 31st of August 2016, the Senate voted 61-20 in favor of impeachment, finding Rousseff guilty of breaking budgetary laws and removing her from office. Critics of the impeachment saw it as a legislative coup d'état, since the budgetary adjustments happened in her first term, and not after her re-election. Vice President Temer succeeded Rousseff as the 37th president of Brazil. His government implemented policies that contradicted the platform on which Rousseff's Workers' Party had been elected. In one of the most controversial and politically heated periods of modern Brazilian history. Electoral system. Voting in Brazil is allowed for citizens over 16 years of age, and mandatory for those between 18 and 70 years of age. Those who do not vote in an election and do not later present an acceptable justification must pay a fine of 3 Brazilian reais and 51 centavos. Brazilian citizens residing abroad only vote for president. Presidential elections. The president and the vice president of Brazil are elected using the 2-round system. Citizens may field their candidacies for the presidency and participate in the general elections, which are held on the first Sunday in October. If the most voted candidate takes more than 50% of the overall vote, he or she is declared elected. If the 50% threshold is not met by any candidate, a second round of voting is held on the last Sunday in October. In the second round, only the 2 most voted candidates from the first round may participate. The winner of the second round is elected President of Brazil. Candidates for president run for office jointly with the candidate for vice president, and the vice president is elected as a consequence of the election of the president. Federal Senate elections. 2/3 of the 81 members of the Federal Senate will be elected, the other third having been elected in 2014. 2 candidates will be elected from each of the states and federal district using majority block voting, with voters able to cast 2 votes each. Chamber of Deputies elections. All 513 members of the Chamber of Deputies will be elected, with candidates elected from 27 multi-member constituencies corresponding to the states and federal district, varying in size from 8 to 70 seats. The chamber elections are held using open list proportional representation, with seats allocated using the simple quotient. Legislative Assemblies elections. All members of the state legislative assemblies and of the federal district legislative chamber, varying in size from 24 to 94 seats, will be elected. These elections are also held using open list proportional representation, with seats allocated using the simple quotient. Attack against Bolsonaro during campaign event. Jair Bolsonaro was stabbed on 6 September 2018 while campaigning in the city of Juiz de Fora, Minas Gerais, and interacting with supporters. Bolsonaro's son, Flavio, has stated that his father's wounds were only superficial and he was recovering in hospital. Police arrested and identified the attacker as Adelio Bispo de Oliveira, who claimed that he was ordered by God to carry out the attack. Flavio Bolsonaro later stated that the wounds inflicted seem worse than initially thought. He tweeted about his father's condition, explaining that the perforation reached part of the liver, the lung, and part of the intestine. He also stated that Bolsonaro had lost a large amount of blood, arriving at the hospital with a pressure of 10/3, but had since stabilized. Most of the other candidates in the presidential race and the current Brazilian president, Michel Temer, condemned the attack. Presidential debates. On the 1st of September 2018, the Superior Electoral Court voted 6-1 to reject Lula's candidacy, but approved the PT-Pros coalition, the People Happy Again, and the vice presidential candidacy of Fernando Haddad. The Workers' Party replaced Lula with Haddad and announced the former presidential candidate Manuela Dávila as his running mate. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Would you like to know more?